We continue now at the top of Daf Membeis Amud Aleph in Meseches Gitin. This is Gittin Daf 42a. On the previous summit, according to Rav Yosef, there's a machlokas tanoim, both when you free an eved with a shtar or when you redeem an eved with kesef, whether you can do it halfway or not. Rebbe says you can do it halfway, and the Rabbanan say you cannot do it halfway. And the issue is that the Mishnah does have a situation of an individual who's half Eved, half Ben Chorin. And so the Gemara asked, according to Rav Yosef, that this issue is a machlokas tanoim. Are we saying that our Mishnah is only going according to Rebbe and not like the Rabbanan? And the Gemara answers, Be'eved shel shnei shutfin v'divrei hakol. It could be that our Mishnah goes according to everyone, according to divrei hakol, and it's talking about a situation of an Eved that belongs to two partners. And as we explained in the Mishnah, one of the partners frees the Eved, so now the Eved is half free and half Eved. Shel shnei shutfin, says Rashi, Tekevan de'ein lo bo el chetzio. In that situation, since even each partner only has half, afilu rabbanan modu dekana. Even the Rabbanan would admit, everyone would admit, that if he frees his half, that Eved would go free, meaning half free. When he frees half, he's going to go half free. Because nothing's left remaining. That's already like a case of a wife that totally leaves the husband. Here, the Eved is totally leaving this particular master. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rabba says, Machlokas, the machlokas between Rebbe and the Rabbanan, it's talking about when a master frees half the slave and leaves half the slave. But if he frees half the slave and sells the other half, or gives away as a gift the other half, since the entire Eved is leaving his possession, then in that situation, everybody agrees that would be a good acquisition. Rashi says, Machlokas de Rebbe v'Rabbanan v'hiniyah chetzu. It's only if he leaves half. The ba'inon, again, as Rashi said before, we require the nefek kulei minei ke'ish. It all has to leave his possession, just like a wife. Aval shichar chetzu, but if he frees half, umachar tchila chetzu, and before that he had sold half, says Rashi, or it all happens at one time, again, then it would be effective. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaye says to Rabba, uvekulo lo pligi, but in a situation where the entire Eved leaves the reshus of the master, they're not arguing, are you really saying that in such a situation the kinyan would be effective, the Eved would go free? But we learned in one brisa, hakosev nechasav l'shnei avodav. Let's say a person gives over all of his property to two of his slaves, so now it turns out that each slave owns half of the other slave. Kanu meshachrin zeh, so that kinyan works, it is effective, and they can then free one another. But we learned in another brisa, ha'omer kol nechasai nesunin leploni uploni avdai. If a person says all of my property is given over to my two avodim ploni and ploni, seems to be an identical case. Af atzmam lo kanu. So in that case, it is not effective. They don't even acquire themselves. Forget about the property. They don't even acquire themselves, and they remain slaves. And so the Gemara now says, how do we resolve the contradiction in Brisas? My love, is it not? Ha Rebbe v'ha One Brisa is Rebbe. Rebbe is the one that says if you free half a slave, it's effective. And the other Brisa is the Rabbanan that says if you free half a slave, it is not effective. And you see that they're arguing even in a situation where the entire Eved leaves the Rishus of the master, because that's what's happening over here. The Eved is totally leaving the master. He's going half free, and half of one Eved is going to the other Eved, and the same with the second Eved. And the Gemara says, no, that's not what's going on over here. It's not that one Brisa is Rebbe and one is the Rabbanan. We actually can explain the Brisas that they do not contradict each other in other fashions. And the Gemara gives the first suggestion, again, idi v'idi Rabbanan. Really, both Brisas are the Rabbanan that in general, you're not able to free half a slave. But hadamar kulo, hadamar chatzi. But one brisa that's talking about a situation where he says kulo, meaning he says, I'm giving you all of my property. He says that to both avodim, to each eved, they're getting all of the property. The other one, he tells each eved, they're getting half the property. And again, as we said, according to the Rabbanan, half the property is not going to be effective. You cannot free half a slave. But the Gemara says, V'midiktani seifa, but in the second brisa, it says at the end of that brisa, V'imamar chatzi lo kanu. It says if he says chatzi, it's not going to be a good acquisition. But mechlal dereisha damar kulo, doesn't that imply that the beginning of the second brisa is not a case of chatzi like we're suggesting, but it's a case where he says kulo, and to that the Gemara says, no, prushe kamefarish. Really, the brisa, the seifa of the brisa is just explaining the reisha. It's all the same case. It's all chatzi. Af atzman lo kanu, the kinyan will not be effective. Keitzad, how so? Kagon damar chatzi chatzi, in a situation where he says chatzi chatzi. And the Gemara says you have to say this. Anyway, hachinam mistabra, it makes sense to say that the seifa of the second brisa is explaining the reisha. Tisal gadaitach reisha damar kula, because if the beginning of the second brisa was talking about where he said kulo, he was giving each of them all of the property. So hashdamar kula lo kan, if when you say kulo it doesn't work. Amar chatzi chatzi mi boy, do we even need to say a case of chatzi chatzi? We wouldn't even need it. So it must be the whole thing is chatzi chatzi. But the Gemara says that's not necessarily a proof. Imisham halo irya, if that was the only issue, that would not be a proof, because it could be tana seifa legluye reisha. It could be that the seifa is talking about chatzi chatzi in order to reveal that the reisha is talking about kulo. Shalo tomar reisha damar chatzi chatzi. Don't think that the reisha of the second brisa is chatzi chatzi avalamar kulo kana. But if it's kulo, it would be a good kinyan. Don't think that tana seifa damar chatzi chatzi mechlal the reisha damar kulo. The seifa therefore says chatzi chatzi to imply, and that way you can understand that the reisha is a situation where he said kulo, and again vafilu hachi lo kanu, and nevertheless there was no kinyan. And Rashi explains Hadam Arkulo, again the resolution of the two brises is the first brisa, Kamais is talking where he says, I'm giving you all of my property. He says that to each Eved, Kegon Shakasav Shnei Shtaros, Kedefarishis, he writes two separate documents as I explained, Uvchalechad Kasav Kol Nechasai Leploni Avdi, and in each star he says, all my property goes to so and so my Eved. Umodu Rabbanan Dekevin Dezichol Hem Bebasachas V'Nafki Kulu Mine Kanu. The Rabbanan would then admit, since he's giving them at the same time, he's doing this at the same time to both of them, and they are completely leaving his rishus, the master's rishus, the kinyan is going to be effective. Uvasraisa Damer Chatzi Chatzi B'Shtar HaEchad Kasav Chatzi Nechasai Loch V'Shein B'Sheni Lechavero. In the second case, in the second brisa, it's Chatzi Chatzi, meaning in one document he says to one Eved, half my property goes to you, and then the second one, the same thing to the other Eved, Lefigach lo kanu, therefore it's not going to be an effective kinyan. Davale b'chol echad shichur chetziu, each one is a situation where he freed half of the slave, v'hiniach chetziu, and left half of the slave, which is not effective. And Rashi points out, v'lo boy kasav u'masr lazev v'hadar masr lazev lo kanu. You don't even need to say a situation where he doesn't do it b'vasachas. He first gives to one, then the other. That certainly is not a kinyan. T'chim masr l'kama shayir palgi. When he gives to the first Eved, he's left off half. V'lo kanu, that's not a kinyan. V'chein l'sheni, and that's the same thing by the second. Elafilu masr l'shneim ka'achas. But even if he would give the documents to both avadim at the same time, so maybe you can say in that situation, it's not like he left off anything. He got rid of all of his property at the same time, but still, lo kanu, still it's not a kinyan, says Rashi. Tekevin the chatzin nechasai kasav b'chol chad, since he wrote the words, half my property in each document, dil machad palga kasav l'tarvayu v'ikoshir. Maybe it's the same half that he gave to both of them, and maybe he did leave off something, and so therefore it's not going to be effective even in a situation where it was bevas achas. And the Gemara continues, same if you want, I could say another resolution to the two brises, lokash, it's not difficult. Kan b'shtar echad, kan b'shnei shtaros. In one case we're talking about with one document, and in one case we're talking about with two documents. And Rashi explains, b'shtar echad, if it's one document, lo kana, then the kinyan will not be effective. Kagon, for example, what would it be one document? Kagon nechasai leploni uploni avdai. He writes in one document, Kagon kol nechasai rather, leploni uploni avdai. He writes in one document, all my property go to these two avadim, ploni and ploni. And why is that not effective? Why is one document not effective? Techsiv law, because we learn out from the word law, v'lo law v'lechaverta. By divorce, you can't do it to her and her friend. It has to be one document for one wife. Ein shtei nashim iskarshos beget echad. The halach is you can't divorce two wives with one get, with one divorce document. And the same thing is true here. Ve'en shnei avadim ishtachrim beget echad. You can't have two slaves go free with one shtar. And so therefore, again, when you're talking about with one shtar, b'shtar echad, that's going to be the second brisa where there's no kinyan, and b'shnei shtaros, that's going to be the first brisa where the kinyan is effective. And the Gemara says, 1 second, b'shtar echad, with one shtar, ma'ir chatzi chatzi. So why does it say in that brisa the case is chatzi chatzi? Afilu amar kulo nami lo kanu. Even if it was kulo, even if it said in the shtar the entire, you're going to get all of the property, it's also not a kinyan if the case is with shtar echad. And the Gemara says, hachinami kamar, that's actually what it means. Afatzman lo kanu b'amed devar mamurim b'shtar echad. It means as follows, it's not a kinyan if it's one document, avol b'shnei shtaros kanu, but if it's two documents it would be effective, v'yamamar chatzi chatzi, but if it's chatzi chatzi, like we said above, af b'shnei shtaros nami lo kanu, even if it's two shtaros, it will not be a kinyan. And the Gemara continues, if you want, I could say another resolution, the following answer, to resolve the two brises. Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan bebas achas, kan bozeh arzeh. In one case, we're talking where both avodim receive at the same time. And the other case, we're talking where it's bozeh arzeh, first given to one Eved, and then given to the other Eved. And Rashi says, Kan bebasachas utarvayu b'dam arkulu. According to this answer, both cases, both are talking about a situation where he gives all the property. V'hadukatani kanu in the first brisa, which said the kinyan is effective, shemasar shnei hashtaros bebasachas. He's giving both shtaros at the exact same time. Each Eved is getting it at the same time as the other one. V'hadatani lo kanu b'zeh acharzeh. When it says the kinyan is not effective, that's if it's done b'zeh acharzeh. But the Gemara continues, Bishlama Basra Lokani, in the situation of Zeh Achar Zeh, why exactly is it not effective? I understand that the Eved who receives the property second, he's not going to acquire anything. Dakani Lekama, because all the property was already given to the first Eved. Elakama Likni Nafshe Likni Lechavre. But the first Eved, the one who receives the document first, and he says all the property is going to you, to this first Eved, so he should get himself, he should also acquire his friend, he should acquire the other slave, and so the kinyan should work Legabe him as far as the first Eved is concerned. And the Gemara says to that, you're right, this answer is not good, because we understand Basachas would be effective, but Zeh Achar Zeh should also be effective, at least for the first Eved. It's not going to be totally ineffective, and therefore we have to go back to the answers we gave before. And the Gemara continues, Ravashi says a different resolution, Shani Hosam, it's different over there in the second Brisa. The reason why it doesn't work, to Kakari Lu Avdai, because he's referring to them as my Avodim. Since he calls them Avodim, it seems he's giving them the property, but not actually freeing them. He's still referring to them as Avodim. But the Gemara says, Amarle Rafram Ravashi. Rafram says to Ravashi, Vidilma Avdai Shayu Kvar. Maybe when he uses the word my slaves, he means you were my slaves. But maybe he really does intend to free them. And we have a proof to that. Milo Tanan, did we not learn in the Mishnah? Hakosev Kol Nechasav Liavdo Yotza Lecheres. If a person gives all of his property to a slave, as we've been saying, that slave goes free. He also is being given himself, so to speak. Shayir Karka Kolshu. But if any Karka is left back, if he says particular Karka, any amount of Karka is left out of it, lo yatsa l'cheiros, so then he doesn't go free. Rabbi Shimon says liolam hu ben chorn, he always goes free. At sheyomer kol nechasayin nesunin leploni avdi, unless he says all my property is given to so and so my servant, chutz me echad me ribo shaben, except 1/10,000th. And so the Gemara now says, the only reason he doesn't go free is because of that phrase, except for 1/10,000th. But other than that, if he wouldn't have said that phrase, then the kinyan would be effective. Amai, but why is it effective? Eved kakarile. But in this example, he's calling him an Eved. It says, Nesunin leploni avdi, my Eved. And so therefore, again, how can he refer to him as an Eved and he still goes free? And so you see a proof. Ela avdi shayakvar obviously means my slave originally, who was my slave in the past tense. Here also, Avdai Shahayu Kvar. It means those who were my slaves in the past tense. And Rashi explains, Shayir Karka Kolshu, Dukosav Chutz Min HaKarka Kolshu. Again, let's say he wrote in the shtar, except for this small amount of karka, lo yatsa ben chorin. So in that case, he does not go free. Why? To lo yadinan hai karka shire, because we don't know which karka is being left out. Uvechol kolshu amrinan hai shire. So every small amount of karka, we say maybe that's the karka that's been left out. V'kevan to karkos lokana, and since every piece of karka might have been left out, and he's not getting any karka, legufe nami lokana. So he doesn't acquire himself either. The Eved doesn't go free. To lo palginan dibura, because we don't split up the words. Hoelu v'chad dibura akni legufe nechasim. Since it was one statement that gave him himself and the property, upalga dibura lo eskayim, and already half of the phrase is not being fulfilled, so idach palganami lo mekayim, so the other half also will not be fulfilled. And Rashi continues, Rabbi Shimon Savar, Rabbi Shimon holds Palginan, that we do say Palginan Dibura, Hoel Vihizkir Karka B'Shiura Karko Sud Delokana, since he mentioned Karka in terms of what he's leaving out, so he left out the Karka. Avalu Atzma Deleka L'Sfuke B'Shiura Kana, but the Eved himself, who certainly was not left out, that kinyan is effective, according to Rabbi Shimon, unless the way it's phrased is Chutz Me Echad Me Ribo, unless he says except for 1/10,000th, to Kavan Delopira Shiura, because since he didn't even explain what kind of property is being left out, we say maybe he left out the Eved himself. Maybe the Eved himself is not acquiring himself. Maybe the master considers the Eved to just be like 1/10,000th of his property. And the Gemara continues in reference to an Eved who is half Eved and half free, and he works one day for his master and one day for himself. So the Gemara says, Negocha shor yom shel rabo, let's say a shor, an ox, gores him on the day he's working for his master. L'rabo, so then the damages are paid to the master. That day he belongs to the master. Yom shel atzmo, if he's gored on a day that he's working for himself, that he's a free man. Liatzmo, so then the payment goes to himself. But the Gemara says, Elamayata, but according to that logic, Yom Shel Rabo Yisa Shivcha, on the day that he belongs to his master, he should be able to marry a Shivcha maidservant. Yom Shel Atzma Yisa Baschor, and on the day that he works for himself, when he's free, he should be able to marry a free woman. But we did not say that in the Mishnah. And so the Gemara says, Isura lo kamrin, and we wouldn't apply this logic to prohibitions, to Isser. When it comes to mumminus, to monetary issues, we'll apply that kind of logic, but not when it comes to Isser v'heter. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here, the following proof, Hemis Misha Chetzio Eved v'Chetzio Ben Chorin, let's say an ox kills an individual who's half Eved and half free, no saying Chatzi Knas L'Rabo, so half of the fine, in general by an Eved, there's a fine of 30 shkolim, if an ox kills an Eved, so half of the Knas here is paid to the master, because again, this is a half an Eved. And Rashi explains, Negocho Shora Masnisin Koi, this is going on our Mishnah, Misha Chatzio Eved v'chulu. Again, the Mishnah mentioned that he works one day for himself and one day for the master. Umeim Rabbi Alma, this is just a statement of the Gemara. Yom Shel Rabo L'Rabo, meaning in Yom Shel Rabo Negocho v'chavabo P'chas the dam of L'Rabo. If he wounded him on the day that he was working for his master, that amount of damage is paid to the master. Shor Mishalim Nezek, a shor pays damages, Dainu P'chas damim, which is the lowering in value that happened to the Eved because of the damage. And Rashi continues, Isura lo kamrin, and we don't apply that logic to Isser v'Hetzer, to Tahav l'Chatzain, that we start splitting it up like this. Aval kol zechias mamon, but when it comes to monetary issues, ki heichi d'melachto tzeluya b'yamim kein kol shvach mamon. Just like the work is dependent on the day, so too when it comes to the monetary issues, that depends on the day. Hamas, and then the Gemara said, let's say he's killed by the ox, and again, a half slave, half free man. B'shor hamuad kai, we're talking about a shore that is a muad. It's a shore that's accustomed to goring. The gabe Evan knows in shloshim kesef, that by an Evan the general fine is 30 kesef. The aino knas, that's the fine. The afilu eino shav dinar knows in shloshim sela. Even if he's not even worth a dinar, you still have to pay that 30 sela. That's a fine. The gabe ben chorin knows in kofer. Now, by a free man, let's say he's killed by an ox, so there's a payment called kofer. The hainu dmei harug, that is the value of the individual that was killed. That's paid to the yarshim. That's paid to those who inherit the individual who was killed. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis.